There are some among us who don't see the ocean simply as an unending horizon of salt water. Instead, we see it as something much bigger, much more crucial. An expanse of opportunity, adventure, home. Perhaps you're one of us, one who considers the sounds of the rolling waves as the soundtrack of your days. Maybe your legs too come from the sea. I can measure the mark of any mariner with my eyes closed. You see, I've met so many a sailor, and I've trained many more. But that was a long time ago. These days, I'm in retirement, and this is my home, my final resting place, just beneath the beautiful False Bay. It's not too shabby, I think. It's a cozy 50 meters down, with plenty of space to stretch out and rest my weary frames. It's peaceful down here, but I'm not completely alone. That this is not where my story ended, nor is it where it truly began. So, who am I? Some say I'm a ship, but many know I'm far more than that. I've been a teacher, a soldier, and a friend. And, in some corners of the globe, a legend. The year was 1888. The place? Britain. I was first commissioned in as a British Royal Navy cruiser. They named me the HMS Thames. I spent the first part of my life in dutiful service, laid up in reserve and as a port ship guard. Then I was converted to a submarine tender during the First World War. After the war, I was laid up again and left to grow barnacles. Something like a sabbatical, I suppose. And then, in 1920, my sabbatical came to an end. I was needed all the way at the southernmost tip of Africa. Cape Town's Naval Cadet Corps needed a new base. Maritime activity in the Cape was becoming increasingly important, and they needed an old hand to guide the new cadets. And who better for the job than little old me? At least that's what the Master Mariner, famed philanthropist and businessman, Mr. T.B. Davis thought. He was a man of vision, who understood the importance of the strategic position of the Cape. He knew it was vital that South Africa had a maritime industry that could rival the best. And in honor of his son, Howard, who died in the First World War, he donated me to be the full-time institution for cadet training. A contingent of these cadets even traveled all the way to England to form the nucleus of my delivery crew. And after a treacherous and rather slow 47-day voyage, I arrived in the Cape on the 26th of March, 1921. I'm sad to say that I didn't look much like the legend I was to become. It wasn't exactly the first impression I was hoping for, but I had arrived. Following an extensive and much-needed refit, I was painted gleaming white and transferred to my permanent moorings offshore. I was formally commissioned on the 1st of April, 1922. Being the first ever South African naval training ship, my arrival was hailed in the press, and rightly so. They recognized our calling to build a truly South African sea service. And so, I was finally ready for my first cadets. At the naming ceremony, which also marked the first intake of cadets, His Royal Highness Prince Arthur, the Duke of Connaught, said,
"I hope that the 2 years you spend on board will be pleasant and industrious ones. You should remember that you have the privilege and responsibility of founding a tradition which must guide those who come after you. The splendid example set by the merchant marine in the late war should be an inspiration to you all. An example of duty nobly performed, regardless of all risks and without counting the costs."
And so began the first term, that of 1922-23. All 75 of my bright-eyed and bushy-tailed first cadets arrived on the 15th of March. After the first class of successful cadets had passed through my hull, I was even upgraded to improve my training capabilities. In 1925, my tall funnel and large ventilator cowls were removed to provide clear deck space for training. For the next 20 years, I lived in Simons Bay and passed out hundreds of cadets. By 1933, it was reported that I passed out 668 cadets, 72% of which were placed at sea. By 1939, we reached the 1,000 milestone. Simons Bay was the perfect offshore mooring for a training ship like myself. It was the very center of South African naval history, surrounded daily by ships, and continually exposed to the vigorous weather of False Bay. It was the closest my cadets could come to actually training at sea. Life aboard was not easy. To the modern viewer, conditions aboard may appear Spartan. Accommodation was tight. Cadets had little to no personal space. They slept in hammocks, slung anew every night.
Our daily routine started at 600 hours and ended at 22. The first ordeal was a cold shower.
But it wasn't all bad. My cadets were allowed to take what must have felt like a most luxurious bath, once a month.
After that, it was physical training on the upper deck, followed by inspection. Speaking to your neighbors on parade or lack of rigidity were punishable offenses. After breakfast, we descended into the bowels of the ship to our classrooms. The conventional schooling lasted for several hours. The teachers came aboard daily, and for the most part, they were approachable but strict. Then, navigation and seamanship classes lasted for a total of 5 hours per day.
But the skills needed to thrive in the maritime industry were not all my cadets were taught while aboard. I was to turn these young boys into men. If duty was non-negotiable, then the essential values of self-discipline, teamwork, and group identity had to be inculcated in these cadets. The ship was a completely new environment to my junior cadets. It was an institution with strict but fair rules and regulations, which were enforced by the instructors, who were all ex-petty officers of the Royal Navy. And, as you could imagine, a large group of young boys on the cusp of manhood needed a fair amount of exercise. Pulling a heavy cutter, or rowing as it's known to landlubbers, was one such activity. It went away to keeping these rowdy boys out of trouble. On top of this, cadets were taught seafaring basics, tying knots, making sails, and signaling. Despite the rigorous training and discipline instilled in these lads, many remembered their time on the bothy as a grand time. But then,
Adolf Hitler is dictator of Germany.
the outbreak of the Second World War was upon us, and the world stopped. But our men rose to the occasion. Ex-cadets of our training ship acquitted themselves with honor and duty, and served with excellence, distinguishing themselves in times of crisis. One such man was our H.H. Biermann. Through his service, Biermann became a full admiral and chief of the South African Defence Force, the only full admiral in the history of the South African Navy to date. He was also awarded an OBE for distinguished service during the invasion of southern France. Two cadets who served in the Air Force were a particular point of pride. Cadet 573 John Nettleton was awarded the highest military award, the Victoria Cross, for gallantry in action. Sadly, he was reported missing a year later, presumably killed in the line of duty. Another well-known war hero was Cadet 168 A.G. Sailor Milan. He also joined the Royal Air Force and became a famed fighter pilot, taking part in the Battle of Britain. He was nicknamed Sailor due to his training on the bothy. He was the most decorated Royal Air Force fighter pilot of the conflict. In addition, he was also decorated by Czechoslovakia and France. On his return to South Africa, having served alongside fine men of many races, he became a politically active and outspoken critic to the imposition of apartheid. During the war, some 75% of the bothy boys answered the call to arms, and 85 made the ultimate sacrifice. By the end of the war, the dedication and accomplished service of our fine men was beyond a doubt. After the war, it was computed that my cadets had earned more decorations and medals per capita than any other school in the then British Empire, a record of which all South Africans can be proud. And what of my fate? In July 1942, considering the risk posed by a known presence of enemy submarines operating along the South African coast, the cadets were relocated to their hitherto sports ground on Red Hill, retaining the name SATS General Botha. I was requisitioned by the Royal Navy and unofficially renamed Thames. I was used as a detention barracks and then alongside as a store facility. Sadly, once the war was done, I and many others were distressed to find that I could no longer be used as a training facility, and on the 13th of May, 1947, I was honorably sunk in False Bay. And so, finally, at the ripe old age of 59, they put me to rest. But can a legend ever truly die? 1948, the establishment was moved to the former South African Air Force crash boat station at Gordons Bay. The name of the establishment was changed to the South African Nautical College General Botha, and a new phase in the life of the establishment commenced. Under the command of Captain G.V. Legassi, the new Captain Superintendent. He designed my symbol. It's repeated in every air brick in college buildings, as well as in many other places. Maybe you know of this impressive display. It's about 280 meters above the town of Gordons Bay. It was built in November 1949. Contrary to what some may think and what others have claimed, the letters stand for our training ship, the General Botha, and decidedly not for the town of Gordons Bay. And so, for the next 10 years, the SANC General Botha prospered. An engineering course was introduced, and standards of training were further improved. In 1958, the South African government placed the establishment under the control of the Department of Defense, and the Navy assumed responsibility. But sharing the college facilities with the Navy trainees proved untenable. And at long last, in 1966, the General Botha and her cadets moved to the newly completed South African Merchant Navy Academy, adjacent to Table Bay Harbour in Granger Bay. What was to be the final phase in the existence of the General Botha commenced under Captain Superintendent Philip Nankin. He was the principal driving force behind the creation of the new establishment, and for the first time the General Botha operated out of brand new purpose-designed facilities. It had at its disposal its own well-equipped 20-meter ketch-rigged motor sailing yacht, the S.Y. Howard Davis. There was some concern among old salts that the old Bothy traditions and high standard of training would be lost. On the contrary, these were all maintained. My cadets regularly won pulling regattas against the Navy and crews of visiting naval ships. This showcased the standard of my training to the public, and more importantly, to the shipping companies who employed my cadets. In 1987, I received my final year of cadets. It was no longer financially viable to train cadets as we had, and formal incorporation into the Cape Technicon took place on the 19th of June, 1990. A proud tradition had finally come to an end. Altogether, some 3,000 cadets received their training in the ship and shore establishments which so proudly bore the name General Botha from 1922 to 1987. Always they are spoken of with respect. The General Botha motto of honor and duty has been well served, and the legacy, as they say, lives on.